shadows, and silence. Eleanor Reed tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear as she adjusted the lighting on the Tang Dynasty ceramic. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, treating the thousand-year-old artifact with reverence that few visitors to the Westbrook Museum of Fine Arts would notice. That was the paradox of her work. The better she performed, the more invisible she became. "Ms. Reed, he's asking for you," Josephine whispered, appearing at Eleanor's side. The young intern's voice carried an unmistakable tension that had become commonplace since Horizon Technologies had acquired the museum 3 months ago. Eleanor straightened her modest navy blazer. "Tell Mr. Grant I'll be there in 5 minutes. This installation needs to be completed," he said immediately. Josephine's apologetic expression said everything about the new management style. With a sigh, Eleanor carefully stepped back from her work. The East Wing exhibition was opening tomorrow, and 1,000 details still required her attention. Details that Maxwell Grant, tech billionaire turned culture enthusiast, would likely never appreciate. The walk to the administrative offices felt longer than usual. Staff members gave her sympathetic glances as she passed. Everyone knew what these summons entailed. Another lecture on modernizing the museum experience, which typically meant sacrificing educational depth for flashy, interactive displays. Maxwell. Grant's office had once belonged to Dr. Harrington, the previous director who had mentored Eleanor for 15 years. Where warm academic clutter had once created a sanctuary of knowledge, now minimalist furniture and cold steel dominated the space. And behind the imposing glass desk sat the man himself, handsome in the conventional way of someone with unlimited resources for personal maintenance, his tailored suit probably costing more than Eleanor's monthly salary. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Grant?" Eleanor kept her voice neutral, professional. Maxwell barely looked up from his tablet. "The Blackwell auction is tonight. My usual +1 has canceled." Eleanor waited for him to continue, to explain what this had to do with her pressing exhibition work. He finally met her gaze with impatient blue eyes. "I need someone who actually knows something about art. You'll accompany me." It wasn't a request. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm with indignation. "Mr. Grant, the Tang Dynasty exhibition opens tomorrow. There are dozens of critical details. Delegate them." He waved dismissively. "The Blackwell collection includes pieces we've been trying to acquire for years. This is actually your job, Ms. Reed. Curating is my job. Being your escort to a social function isn't in my job description." The words escaped before Eleanor could filter them. Something flickered across Maxwell's face. Surprise, perhaps, that the quiet curator had backbone. "Not an escort. A subject matter expert. There's a difference." He returned to his tablet. "The Blackwell collection includes the song landscape we've discussed acquiring. I thought you'd be interested." Eleanor's heart skipped. The mist over. Mountain Pine's scroll had been on her acquisition wish list for years. The previous administration had never had the funds to pursue it. "The car will pick you up at 7. Wear something appropriate." Maxwell's attention was already elsewhere, dismissing her without words. Eleanor stood her ground. "Define appropriate, Mr. Grant." His eyes flicked up, assessing her standard work attire, practical slacks, sensible shoes, and the blazer she'd owned since graduate school. "Something that doesn't make us look like we're operating a museum on the brink of bankruptcy." "Despite your apparent beliefs, Mr. Grant, my expertise in Ming Dynasty paintings isn't related to my wardrobe budget." Eleanor's voice remained calm despite her racing pulse. For a moment, Maxwell actually looked at her, really looked, as if seeing something unexpected. Then his expression closed again. 7 o'clock, Ms. Reed, the Robertson Gallery downtown. Eleanor left without another word. her mind racing between the exhibition deadline, the impossible wardrobe demand, and the tantalizing possibility of seeing the mist over mountain pines scroll in person. As she passed her reflection in the gallery glass, she saw what Maxwell Grant saw, not the woman who could identify brushwork techniques from 12 different dynasties, but someone ordinary, unmemorable, practical. What Maxwell Grant failed to see was everything else. "Problem?" Tessa asked as Eleanor returned to the exhibition space. As head of restoration, Tessa had become Eleanor's closest ally in the institutional upheaval. "Apparently, I'm attending the Blackwell auction tonight as Grant's subject matter expert." Eleanor adjusted her glasses with frustration. Tessa whistled low. "The auction everyone's talking about? With all the ultra-rich art collectors?" "The very same. And I apparently need to wear something appropriate." His words, a slow smile spread across Tessa's face. "You know what? Let them see what they've been overlooking. My sister owns that boutique on Westfield Avenue. Give me your sizes. I'm calling in a favor." "Tessa, I can't." "You can, and you will." Tessa was already texting rapidly. "Time to show Maxwell Grant that knowing the difference between Song and Ming Dynasty isn't the only thing he's been missing." Brush strokes of truth. The Robertson Gallery transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth for the Blackwell auction. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, where clusters of the city's elite gathered in tailored finery and jewels that caught the light like captured stars. Outside, a steady procession of luxury vehicles delivered guests who were accustomed to spending more on a single painting than most people earned in a lifetime. Eleanor stood on the periphery, feeling like an imposter despite Tessa's intervention. The emerald dress her friend had procured fit perfectly, simple in design yet undeniably elegant with its clean lines and subtle sheen. Eleanor had refused the offered jewelry, wearing only her grandmother's modest pearl earrings. Her normally practical hairstyle had been released from its workday constraints, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. "You're late," Maxwell's voice came from behind her, impatient as always. Eleanor turned, meeting his gaze with composure. "I arrived precisely at 7:30, as indicated on the invitation. You specified when I should be picked up, not when I should arrive." Maxwell opened his mouth as if to argue, then paused, taking in her appearance with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite decipher. Not the disapproval she'd expected, but something more complex. "You look suitable," he finally managed, adjusting his perfectly knotted tie. "Your enthusiasm is overwhelming." Eleanor kept her voice dry as she glanced around the room. "The Blackwell collection is displayed through those archways?" Maxwell nodded, seemingly relieved to return to business. "Yes, I've arranged a private viewing before the bidding starts. Come." He placed a hand at the small of her back to guide her through the crowd. Eleanor tensed at the unexpected contact, but maintained her professional demeanor as they moved through the sea of expensive perfume and practiced laughter. "Maxwell Grant!" A woman with a glass of champagne intercepted them, her smile as practiced as her casual air of wealth. "I wondered if you'd be here tonight. Everyone's talking about your acquisition of the Westbrook. Quite the departure from your usual tech ventures." "Diversification, Olivia. Art appreciates more reliably than cryptocurrency these days." Maxwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Have you met Eleanor Reed? She's our chief curator at the Westbrook." Olivia's gaze swept over Eleanor with the quick assessment of someone categorizing another person's worth. "How lovely. Are you enjoying your first auction, dear?" "Actually, this is my third Blackwell event, though the first since Senator Blackwell's daughter took over the collection," Eleanor replied. "The family has always had an interesting eye for juxtaposing Eastern and Western techniques. I'm particularly interested in seeing how Penelope has curated since her father's passing." Olivia's expression shifted subtly. "You knew Thomas Blackwell?" "We corresponded about the Ming scrolls he acquired in 2017. I authenticated several pieces. For him." Eleanor spoke without pretension, simply stating facts. Eleanor is one of the foremost experts on East Asian art in the country, Maxwell added, something new in his tone. Was it pride? Before Olivia could respond, a distinguished older man joined their circle. Did I hear someone mention Thomas's Ming collection? That was quite the controversy in authentication circles. Professor Bennett, Eleanor said, genuine warmth entering her voice. It's been years. How wonderful to see you. Eleanor Reed, the professor beamed. My finest doctoral student. Your paper on brush techniques in song landscapes is still required reading in my advanced seminars. Maxwell watched this exchange with increasing interest as Professor Bennett turned to him. You're fortunate to have her at the Westbrook, Mr. Grant. When I heard about the acquisition, I worried about the museum's academic direction. But with Eleanor at the curatorial helm, perhaps there's hope yet. The Westbrook's academic integrity remains our priority, Maxwell replied smoothly, though Eleanor noticed a slight tension in his jaw. Their conversation expanded as others joined, drawn by Professor Bennett's reputation. To Eleanor's surprise, Maxwell stepped back slightly, allowing her expertise to take center stage as questions about the Blackwell collection emerged. She spoke with quiet confidence about provenance patterns, the historical significance of certain pieces, and the subtle differences that separated merely valuable art from truly exceptional treasures. The truly remarkable aspect of the song. Landscape isn't its rarity, though it is indeed rare, Eleanor explained to the growing circle of listeners. It's that the artist chose to depict the relationship between human presence and natural beauty with such restraint. Notice how the human elements, the small boat, the distant temple, are present but humbled by the grandeur of the mountains and mist. There's a philosophical statement about our place in the world that resonates even centuries later. Eleanor didn't notice how the circle had grown, nor how completely she held everyone's attention. She spoke from genuine passion rather than performance, her hands occasionally gesturing to emphasize a point, her eyes bright with enthusiasm for her subject. That's precisely why the Westbrook is interested in the piece, she continued. It complements our existing collection by filling a narrative, gap in how Eastern art evolved in its perspective on humanity's relationship with nature. Maxwell, standing at the edge of the group now, observed with growing fascination. The woman commanding the attention of art collectors worth billions collectively was nothing like the quiet curator who haunted his museum's halls. Her knowledge flowed naturally, without pretension or showmanship, yet it captivated everyone around her. Even Penelope Blackwell herself had joined the circle, nodding with appreciation at Eleanor's insights. I believe the private viewing is ready, announced a gallery assistant, approaching their group. Ms. Blackwell has arranged for champagne in the East Gallery. As the crowd moved toward the exhibition space, Penelope Blackwell fell into step, beside Eleanor. Professor Bennett speaks highly of you, Ms. Reed. I'd value your thoughts on how we've arranged the collection. Maxwell found himself suddenly peripheral, a position entirely unfamiliar to him. He watched as Eleanor moved through the collection with Penelope, occasionally stopping to examine details that others overlooked. What struck him most was her authenticity, where others in the room performed their appreciation with practiced phrases and strategic enthusiasm. Eleanor's responses were genuine, sometimes critical, always thoughtful. Your curator is remarkable, murmured a voice beside him. Vincent Harlow, a notorious tech competitor and art collector, stood watching Eleanor as she discussed a particular brushstroke technique with Penelope. Not the usual type that follows. You around, Grant? Eleanor isn't following anyone, Maxwell replied, surprising himself with the defensiveness in his tone. She's here for her expertise, not decoration. Clearly. Vincent's smile was calculating. The Westbrook was a curious acquisition for Horizon Technologies. Now I'm beginning to understand the appeal. As the evening progressed toward the auction itself, Maxwell noticed something shifting in the room's dynamics. People who had initially dismissed Eleanor were now seeking her opinions. Her genuine passion created a gravitational pull that made the superficial conversations around them seem hollow by comparison. When the bidding began, Eleanor took her seat beside Maxwell, her focus entirely on the catalog rather than the social machinations around them. "The song landscape is fifth in the lineup," she whispered, unaware of how close she'd leaned toward him. "The reserve price is well within our budget parameters, but Vincent Harlow has been asking very specific questions about it." "Let him ask," Maxwell replied quietly. "Some things aren't for sale at any price." Eleanor glanced up, surprised by his tone and the intensity in his eyes that, for once, wasn't directed at a spreadsheet or acquisition target, but at her. The Gallery of Perception. The auction proceeded with the choreographed precision of wealth-changing hands. Paddles rose and fell like conductors' batons, each movement representing sums that could fund small nations. Eleanor watched with professional detachment until lot number 17 appeared, the Song Dynasty landscape scroll, Mist over Mountain Pines. "Starting bid is 3 million, announced the auctioneer, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who regularly sold objects worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. Maxwell lifted his paddle with casual confidence. Eleanor held her breath, noting the slight tension in his jawline, the only indication that this was more than a routine transaction for him. 3.5 million from Mr. Grant, the auctioneer acknowledged. "Do I hear 4? Another paddle rose across the room. Vincent Harlow's smile remained fixed as he made his counter bid. The battle commenced in earnest. 4 million, 4.5, 5 million. With each increase, Eleanor felt a growing sense of unease. The museum's budget was substantial under Horizon's ownership, but not unlimited. At 6 million, she leaned toward Maxwell. "We're approaching the upper limit of what the board approved," she whispered. Maxwell didn't respond, his eyes fixed on Harlow as he raised to 6.5 million. 7 million, Maxwell countered, his voice carrying across the hushed room. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Eleanor fought to keep her expression neutral despite her racing thoughts. 7 million was well beyond their authorized ceiling. Harlow hesitated, then raised his paddle once more. 8 million, the room collectively inhaled. Eleanor placed a light hand on Maxwell's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Mr. Grant, we can't." 9 million, Maxwell announced, ignoring her. Eleanor froze. This had become something beyond acquisition. It was now a competition between rivals, with the artwork merely serving as the battlefield. "Mr. Grant," she whispered urgently, "this isn't prudent. The museum's acquisition fund is separate." "From my personal funds," he replied without looking at her. 9 million from me personally, not the Westbrook. Eleanor blinked in surprise as Harlow raised to 10 million. The bidding had transcended institutional acquisition to become something deeply personal, and she wasn't sure if it was about the artwork anymore. 11 million, Maxwell stated calmly. After a tense moment, Harlow lowered his paddle with a tight smile. "Your victory, Grant." "Sold for 11 million to Mr. Maxwell Grant," the auctioneer declared with satisfaction. As the next lot appeared, Eleanor turned to Maxwell, keeping her voice low but unable to hide her confusion. "That was 3 times the appraised value. Why would you—" "Later," Maxwell cut her off, his attention already on the approaching figure of Penelope Blackwell, who navigated between the auction seats toward them. "Quite the spirited bidding, Maxwell," Penelope remarked, her elegant gray hair framing a face that had seen generations of such art-world battles. "I'm pleased the scroll will go to the Westbrook. It belongs in a museum, not a private vault." She turned to Eleanor with genuine warmth. "Your passion for the piece was evident during our discussion. I'd be delighted if you would join a small gathering at my home after the auction concludes. Just a few serious collectors and scholars, no social butterflies." "We'd be honored," Maxwell replied before Eleanor could speak. Penelope's smile turned knowing. Actually, Maxwell, I was specifically inviting Ms. Reed, though you're welcome as her guest, of course. Eleanor couldn't help the small surge of satisfaction at Maxwell's momentarily speechless expression. Thank you, Ms. Blackwell. I'd be delighted. As Penelope departed, Maxwell leaned closer. What just happened? I believe you've been demoted to +1 status, Eleanor replied with the faintest hint of amusement. Apparently, Penelope Blackwell values substance over net worth. The remainder of the auction passed in a blur of record-breaking sales and tactical acquisitions. Throughout it all, Eleanor remained acutely aware of Maxwell beside her, his occasional glances in her direction, the subtle shifts in his posture when Vincent Harlow approached to congratulate him on the Song Landscape acquisition. 11 million. Is steep, even for a piece of that caliber, Harlow commented, his smile not reaching his eyes. One might think you were bidding on something more valuable than paper and ink. Maxwell's response was cool. Value is subjective, Vincent. I'm sure you understand that better than most. As Harlow retreated, Eleanor whispered, He wanted it because we wanted it. Yes, Maxwell agreed, surprising her with his candor. Corporate rivalry extends to all spheres, including art. That seems like an expensive form of competition. Some competitions are worth the price. His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. After the auction concluded, their driver transported them to Penelope Blackwell's historic mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The gathering was indeed intimate, perhaps 20 people compared to the 100+ at the auction. Eleanor recognized several prominent museum directors, a Nobel-winning author known for his art history volumes, and a princess from a small European country who curated her family's centuries-old collection. I feel rather out of my depth, Maxwell murmured as they accepted champagne from a passing server. Eleanor glanced at him in surprise. I don't think I've ever heard you admit to feeling uncomfortable in any situation. I know technology and business. He gestured subtly to where Professor Bennett was engaged in animated conversation with the princess about brush technique evolution. Is your world, not mine. The great Maxwell Grant admitting a limitation? I should document this historic moment, Eleanor teased gently. To her surprise, a genuine smile touched his lips. Your sarcasm is duly noted, Ms. Reed. Eleanor, she corrected. If we're to navigate this evening as colleagues rather than boss and employee, perhaps first names would be appropriate. Eleanor, he repeated, something shifting in his expression. And I'm Maxwell. I know who you are, she replied simply. Before he could respond, Penelope Blackwell approached, linking her arm through Eleanor's. You simply must meet Duchess Sophia. She's been studying the relationship between Ming political shifts and artistic expression, exactly what you explored in your dissertation. Eleanor found herself guided away, looking back briefly to see Maxwell standing alone, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. The evening unfolded in a series of fascinating conversations where Eleanor's expertise was not merely acknowledged but celebrated. She moved from discussion to discussion, sometimes catching glimpses of Maxwell on the periphery, a reversal of their usual dynamic. Occasionally, their eyes would meet across the room, and she would find him observing her with growing curiosity. Near midnight, she found herself on a secluded terrace overlooking Penelope's illuminated gardens. The night air provided welcome relief from the intensity of the conversations inside. Hiding? Maxwell's voice came from behind her. Eleanor turned, offering a small smile. Breathing. There's a difference. He joined her at the stone balustrade, his presence less imposing than usual. You're different here. Different how? More. He searched for the word alive. The Eleanor Reed who haunts my museum corridors is efficient, knowledgeable, but restrained. Tonight I've seen you passionate, engaging, occasionally even witty. Perhaps because tonight I'm not being treated as an administrative inconvenience, she replied with unexpected honesty. Maxwell considered this, gazing out at the garden. Have I been that dismissive? You've been consistent in your view of the museum staff as obstacles to your modernization vision rather than partners in preserving something valuable. Eleanor hadn't planned such directness, but the night had shifted something between them. And yet tonight everyone in that room sees your value plainly, including Vincent Harlow, who approached me about offering you a position curating his private collection. Double your current salary, apparently. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. He what? Offered to poach you. Maxwell turned to face her fully now. Should I be concerned? That depends on whether you actually value what I do at the Westbrook. Before Maxwell could respond, Professor Bennett appeared at the terrace entrance. Eleanor, dear, Duchess Sophia is leaving and wanted to exchange contact information about potentially collaborating on an exhibition. With an apologetic glance at Maxwell, Eleanor returned inside, leaving him alone with the night air and uncomfortable new thoughts about the woman he had clearly misjudged. Framed perspectives. The Westbrook Museum hummed with unusual energy as staff prepared for the unveiling of their newest acquisition. The Song Dynasty landscape scroll had arrived that morning under heavy security, creating ripples of excitement throughout the building. Eleanor supervised its installation personally, her attention to detail even more exacting than usual. Lighting is still 2 degrees too warm, she instructed the technician adjusting the display case. The pigments are sensitive to yellow spectrum. Yes. Ms. Reed, the technician nodded, making the adjustment without question. Eleanor's authority had subtly shifted since the Blackwell auction 2 weeks ago. Staff who had previously seen her as merely the quiet, competent curator now regarded her with newfound respect, a change that hadn't escaped her notice. The scroll looks perfect, Tessa commented, joining Eleanor as the technician stepped away. Word is that Grant paid $11 million of his own money for it. The price is irrelevant compared to its cultural significance, Eleanor replied diplomatically. Tessa raised an eyebrow. Also irrelevant is the fact that you apparently dazzled the entire art world elite at Penelope Blackwell's after-party. Josephine heard Maxwell telling the board chairman that you single-handedly raised the museum's profile more in one night than their entire PR department had in a year. Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks. The art spoke for itself. I merely provided context? Tessa's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled by Eleanor's modesty. And the fact that Maxwell has actually been using your first name since then is also completely unrelated? Before Eleanor could formulate a suitable retort, her phone chimed with a message. Speaking of whom, she murmured, reading the screen. He wants to see me in the conference room. Apparently the board has called an emergency meeting. Emergency? About what? Eleanor frowned. I don't know. But they've requested all department heads. The conference room was already half full when Eleanor arrived. Maxwell stood at the head of the table, his expression unusually grave as he spoke quietly with Harrison Wells, the chairman of the board. Other department heads filed in, the mood noticeably tense. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Maxwell began once everyone was seated. We've received information this morning that requires immediate attention. He nodded to his assistant, who distributed folders to everyone present. Eleanor opened hers to find photographs of a striking modern sculpture, a twisted metal form that suggested both violence and beauty. She recognized it immediately as War's Whisper, a controversial piece by renowned sculptor Dominic Caldwell that had been scheduled as the centerpiece of their contemporary exhibition next month. This arrived from The Guardian an hour ago, Maxwell continued, his voice carefully controlled. They're preparing to publish an investigative report claiming that War's Whisper contains metal salvaged from military vehicles involved in the genocide in Rwanda. According to their sources, Caldwell deliberately obtained these materials but concealed their provenance when the piece was acquired by private collectors. A stunned silence fell over the room. The sculpture had been loaned to the Westbrook by a prominent collector as part of their upcoming exhibition on art and conflict. The Guardian has given us 24 hours to comment before they publish, Harrison Wells added, his lined face solemn. We need to decide on our response immediately. Is there proof? Asked Daniel Winters, head of public relations. Their evidence appears substantial, Maxwell replied. They have shipping records, testimonies from metal workers in Rwanda, and documentation of payments. We need to withdraw the piece from exhibition immediately, Winters stated firmly. The PR nightmare if we display it knowing this information. We need to verify the claims first, Eleanor interrupted, surprising herself with her own vehemence. All eyes turned to her. This is potentially devastating to Caldwell's career. We can't simply accept the Guardian's investigation without conducting our own. There isn't time, Winters argued. The story breaks tomorrow. So we rush to judgment without due diligence? Eleanor challenged. That's not how a museum of our stature should operate. Maxwell studied her with an unreadable expression. What do you propose, Eleanor? She met his gaze steadily. We issue a statement acknowledging the serious allegations, announce that we're conducting our own investigation, and temporarily delay the exhibition opening while maintaining that all pieces, including War's Whisper, remain in consideration pending our findings. That's fence-sitting, Winters objected. The public will see it as indecisive at best, complicit at worst. No, Eleanor countered. It's intellectual integrity. Museums aren't just display spaces. We're institutions of research and education. If we abandon those principles at the first sign of controversy, what are we preserving besides our own comfort? The room fell silent again, tension vibrating between opposing viewpoints. Eleanor remained composed despite her racing heart, aware that she was challenging not just Winters, but potentially Maxwell himself. There's another factor to consider, Harrison Wells spoke up. Horizon Technologies has just finalized a major partnership with Global Tech, whose CEO happens to be a significant patron of Caldwell's work and the previous owner of War's Whisper before it was acquired by our current lender. Eleanor felt a chill at the implication. This wasn't just about artistic ethics anymore. It was about business relationships and money. She glanced at Maxwell, wondering which consideration would take precedence in his decision. What's your assessment of the artistic significance of this piece, Eleanor? Maxwell asked, surprising her with the question. She considered carefully before answering. It's undeniably powerful work. Caldwell's technical skill is exceptional, and the piece speaks to the brutality of conflict in ways that few contemporary works achieve. She paused. But if these allegations are true, the piece becomes something else entirely. Not a commentary on atrocity, but an exploitation of it. The materials wouldn't just represent violence, they would be direct products of it. And that changes its artistic merit, Maxwell pressed. It transforms its meaning, Eleanor replied. Art doesn't exist in a vacuum. Context matters, especially when that context involves human suffering. The meeting continued for another hour, with passionate arguments from both sides. Throughout it all, Maxwell remained enigmatically neutral, asking questions but revealing little of his own position. Finally, he called for a short break, asking Eleanor to join him in his office. They walked in silence through the museum corridors, passing the empty space where War's Whisper was scheduled to be installed. In his office, Maxwell closed the door and turned to face her. The Global Tech partnership is worth $50 million to Horizon, he stated without preamble. Their CEO has already called twice this morning. Eleanor's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. I see. Do you? Because he made it very clear that our handling of this situation will directly impact our business relationship. And that's what matters most? Eleanor couldn't keep the edge from her voice. The Westbrook's integrity is secondary to Horizon's. Partnerships? Something flashed in Maxwell's eyes. Frustration, perhaps, or conflict. This isn't as simple as artistic principles versus commercial interests, Eleanor. $50 million means expanded educational programs, improved conservation facilities, acquisition funds for underrepresented artists, all the initiatives you've been advocating for. At what cost? She challenged. If we compromise our fundamental values for funding, what exactly are we funding? Just a prettier showcase for wealthy collectors' trophies? Maxwell moved to the window, gazing out at the museum grounds. When I acquired the Westbrook, many people assumed it was a vanity purchase, a billionaire buying cultural credibility. Others thought it was purely financial, another asset in the portfolio. He turned back to her. Neither was true. Then, why did you buy it? Because institutions like this are becoming endangered. Because preservation of cultural heritage shouldn't depend on government funding whims or fluctuating admission revenues. His voice held unexpected passion. But preservation requires resources, Eleanor. Principals don't pay for climate-controlled storage or restoration equipment. I understand the practical realities, Eleanor replied more gently. But this situation goes beyond budgets and partnerships. This is about what the Westbrook represents, what we choose to validate through our platform. Maxwell studied her for a long moment. 2 weeks ago, you impressed some of the most discerning minds in the art world with your expertise and passion. Vincent Harlow is still trying to poach you for his private collection. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Yet here you are, potentially jeopardizing your standing with the museum's owner over an ethical principle. I didn't realize my standing was in jeopardy, Eleanor replied quietly. It isn't. Maxwell's response came swiftly, surprising them both with its certainty. In fact, it's precisely this integrity that... He stopped himself, seeming to recalibrate his thoughts. The museum needs your voice, Eleanor, even, perhaps especially, when it challenges mine. When they returned to the conference room, Maxwell took his position at the head of the table with renewed purpose. After considering all perspectives, I've made a decision, he announced. We will postpone the exhibition opening by 2 weeks to conduct our own investigation into the allegations regarding War's Whisper. During this time, we will commission an independent ethics panel including art historians, human rights experts, and conservation specialists to examine both the physical evidence and the broader ethical implications. Daniel Winters started to object, but Maxwell continued. Additionally, we will create a public forum within the museum, a special exhibition addressing the complex relationship between art, ethics, and provenance. If the allegations prove true, War's Whisper will be displayed with full transparency about its materials, not as originally intended, but as a case study in ethical consideration. The boldness of the approach silenced the room. Eleanor felt a complex mix of emotions, surprise at Maxwell's decision, respect for its nuance, and something deeper she wasn't ready to examine. This approach will satisfy neither those who want simple condemnation nor those who prefer to separate art entirely from its context, Maxwell acknowledged. But museums shouldn't be in the business of providing comfortable certainties. They should challenge us to think more deeply about beauty, about history, about our own complicity in systems we criticize. His eyes met Eleanor's briefly before he continued. The Westbrook will not shy away from difficult conversations. That's my decision as owner. I expect everyone in this room to support it publicly, regardless of personal reservations. As the meeting adjourned, Eleanor gathered her notes, still processing Maxwell's unexpected stance. She felt his presence before she saw him, stopping beside her chair. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. They strolled through the European wing, where Renaissance masterpieces gazed down from gilded frames, witness to centuries of human folly and triumph. "The global tech CEO won't be pleased," Eleanor ventured. "No," Maxwell agreed. "He won't." The partnership will survive if it's truly valuable to both parties. Maxwell's tone was matter-of-fact. "And if not, we'll find other resources." Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "Why did you decide this way? It would have been easier to withdraw the piece, issue a statement of concern, and protect the business relationships." Maxwell considered her question with unexpected seriousness. 2 weeks ago, I watched you speak about art with complete authenticity. No posturing, no social maneuvering, just genuine belief in its importance. It made everyone else in that room seem hollow by comparison. His voice softened. "Including me." "Maxwell, I've built my career on recognizing value where others miss it," he continued. "I failed to recognize yours until recently. I won't make that mistake again. With you, or with the principles this museum should represent." The weight of his words hung between them, shifting something fundamental in their understanding of each other. Before Eleanor could respond, Josephine hurried toward them with news of reporters gathering at the museum entrance. "The statement needs to be made soon," she reported anxiously. Maxwell nodded, his professional demeanor returning. "I'll handle it." He turned back to Eleanor. "Unless you'd prefer to make the announcement? This approach was essentially your vision." Eleanor shook her head. "This should come from leadership. From you." "We're both leadership, Eleanor." His gaze held hers with new respect. "Whether you've realized it yet or not." The masterpiece. Unveiled morning light streamed through the Westbrook Museum's eastern windows, casting long shadows across marble floors still empty of visitors. In her office, Eleanor reviewed the final report from the ethics panel, each page confirming what the Guardian's investigation had already revealed. War's Whisper contained metal from vehicles directly linked to the Rwandan genocide. The sculptor had knowingly acquired these materials through questionable channels, deliberately obscuring their origins while using the piece's connection to conflict as a marketing angle. The revelation had sent ripples through the art world over the past 2 weeks. Some galleries had hastily removed Caldwell's works from display. Others had issued carefully worded statements about artistic freedom. The global tech CEO had indeed withdrawn from the partnership with Horizon Technologies, a financial blow that had made headlines in the business press. Yet through it all, the Westbrook had maintained its measured approach. The special exhibition, Art, Ethics, and Origin, When Context Transforms Meaning, was set to open tomorrow, with War's Whisper as its central piece, now accompanied by extensive documentation of its provenance and a series of perspectives from genocide survivors, ethics scholars, and art historians. A knock at her door interrupted Eleanor's thoughts. Maxwell stood in the doorway, more casually dressed than usual in a simple button-down shirt without a tie. "The installation team needs final approval on the contextual panels," he said. "I thought you might want to review them together." Eleanor nodded, gathering her notes. They had been working closely over the past 2 weeks, their professional relationship evolving into something more collaborative, more equal. The tension that had once characterized their interactions had transformed into a different kind of energy, one Eleanor wasn't quite ready to name. They walked together through the museum to the contemporary wing where workers were making final adjustments to lighting and display cases. The exhibition space had been transformed, with War's Whisper at its center, but now surrounded by photographs from Rwanda, testimonies from survivors, and timelines connecting the sculpture's creation to historical events. "It's powerful," Maxwell observed quietly as they stood before the completed installation. more powerful than it would have been in its original context. Truth usually is, Eleanor replied, even when it's uncomfortable. They moved through the exhibition space, reviewing each panel and making minor adjustments to wording and placement. Their collaborative rhythm had become so natural that staff had stopped looking surprised when they finished each other's sentences or anticipated each other's concerns. "The New York Times called yesterday," Maxwell mentioned as they approved the final panel. "They want to interview you about the exhibition concept." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "Me? Not you or the PR team? You're the heart of this exhibition. Eleanor, the concept was yours, transforming controversy into education rather than simply removing the problematic piece. The Times recognized that. It was your decision to implement it," she reminded him, against significant financial pressure. Something softened in his expression. "Some things are worth more than money." The weight of unspoken meaning hung between them as they completed their review. When they finished, Maxwell glanced at his watch. "It's nearly noon. Would you join me for lunch? There's something I'd like to discuss away from the museum." 20 minutes later, they sat in a small cafe several blocks from the Westbrook. It was a modest place with excellent food, the kind of establishment Eleanor frequented but would never have expected Maxwell to know about. "How did you find this place?" she asked as they settled at a corner table. "Research," he replied with the hint of a smile. "I asked Josephine where you usually go for lunch." The admission surprised her. "You researched my lunch habits?" "I wanted neutral ground for this conversation." Maxwell seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, turning his water glass slowly. "The past 2 weeks have changed things at the Westbrook. Public response to our approach has been overwhelmingly positive. Attendance projections for the exhibition are the highest in 5 years. "That's wonderful news." "It is." He met her eyes, directly. "But it's also made me reconsider Horizon's involvement with the museum." Eleanor felt a sudden chill. "You're selling the Westbrook?" "No," he said quickly. "Quite the opposite, actually. I'm restructuring its relationship with Horizon. The museum will become an independent trust with its own governance structure and endowment." Eleanor processed this information, trying to understand its implications. "That's a significant change. The Westbrook deserves autonomy from corporate interests. That's become clear through this situation. Its mission should be driven by cultural and educational values, not quarterly reports to shareholders." Maxwell leaned forward slightly. "I'm establishing an initial endowment of $100 million, with provisions for matching future donations. The governance board will include prominent museum directors, art historians, and education specialists." "That's incredibly generous," Eleanor said carefully. "But why now?" Maxwell considered his words before answering. "Because you were right, Eleanor. About everything. About the museum's purpose. About the importance of integrity. About the value of difficult conversations." His voice softened. "You saw the Westbrook not as an asset to be maximized, but as a cultural trust to be protected. I want to ensure that vision continues regardless of Horizon's business priorities." "And who will lead this new independent Westbrook?" Eleanor asked, already suspecting the answer from his expression. "The board will need a director with both administrative experience and scholarly credentials, someone with vision and integrity." His eyes held hers steadily. "I'm hoping you'll consider the position." Eleanor's breath caught. "Me? But I've never—" "You've been effectively leading the museum's cultural direction since I acquired it," Maxwell interrupted gently, "even when I was too blind to see it. The board will announce the formal search next week, but I wanted you to know that you would have my full endorsement." Eleanor fell silent, overwhelmed by the implications. Director of the Westbrook Museum. It was beyond anything she had imagined for her career. "This feels sudden," she finally said. "Does it?" Maxwell's question was genuine. Haven't we been moving toward this since the night of the Blackwell auction? When I saw how everyone responded to your authentic passion, how I responded to it, I began to understand what the Westbrook really needed. And what about what you need? Eleanor asked quietly. Something shifted in Maxwell's expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. That's a more complicated question. Their food arrived, creating a momentary reprieve from the intensity of their conversation. As they began to eat, Maxwell continued more lightly. Regardless of your decision about the directorship, there's another project I'd like your input on. I've been considering establishing a fund for emerging artists from underrepresented communities. The idea would be to provide not just financial support but mentorship and exhibition opportunities. Eleanor recognized this for what it was, an offered bridge across the sudden chasm of professional reconfiguration between them. She accepted it gratefully. That's a wonderful initiative. The gap between academic training and sustainable artistic careers is where we lose so many promising voices. They spent the remainder of lunch discussing the potential program, their conversation flowing with the ease that had developed between them over recent weeks. Yet beneath it ran an undercurrent of unresolved questions about the museum, about Maxwell's true motivations, about the tension that had transformed from antagonism to something much more complex. As they walked back toward the museum, Maxwell stopped at a small park, gesturing toward a bench. "Do you mind? There's something else I need to say before we return." They sat in the dappled shade of an oak tree, the sounds of the city creating a gentle backdrop to this unexpected moment of privacy. "When I purchased the Westbrook, Maxwell began, his gaze on the distance. I thought I understood its value. I saw the collection, the building, the prestige, all quantifiable assets. What I failed to see was its heart." He turned to her. "It's Eleanor Reed." She felt heat rise to her cheeks, but remained silent, sensing he needed to continue. "You challenged me to see beyond spreadsheets and acquisition strategies. You showed me that true value isn't always visible on balance sheets." His voice grew, quieter. "The night of the Blackwell auction changed something for me. Watching you speak about art with such genuine passion, it made me realize how much of my life has been performance rather than authenticity." "Maxwell, please let me finish." His eyes held an intensity that silenced her. "The restructuring of the Westbrook isn't just about museum governance. It's also about creating appropriate boundaries." "Boundaries?" Eleanor repeated, confused. "If you become director, you'll report to a board, not to me." Maxwell's words were carefully measured, which means that anything that might develop between us personally would not involve a power imbalance. Eleanor's heart stuttered as the implication of his words registered. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting nothing," he replied with unexpected gentleness. "I'm simply creating space for possibility." He glanced down, then met her gaze again with rare vulnerability. "The man who dismissed you as too ordinary in your modest blazer was blind to the extraordinary person beneath. I don't want to be that man anymore, Eleanor." The world seemed to still around them. The park, the distant traffic, even the breeze through the oak leaves fading to background as Eleanor processed his words. This was Maxwell Grant, billionaire tech mogul, ruthless businessman, the man who had upended her professional life and then, unexpectedly, recognized her value when no one else had bothered to look. "I don't know what to say," she admitted finally. "You don't need to say anything yet." Maxwell stood, offering his hand to help her up. "The restructuring will take several months. The directorship search will follow proper protocols. You should make decisions based on your career goals, not other considerations." Eleanor accepted his hand, feeling the warm strength of his grip as she rose to stand beside him. "And if those other considerations factor into my thinking regardless?" Something like hope flickered across his features. "Then we'll address them when the time is right, with appropriate boundaries and full transparency. As they walked back toward the museum, Eleanor felt a curious lightness. The West Brook gleamed in the afternoon sun ahead of them. Not just a building housing precious objects, but a living institution with purpose and meaning. In its shadow, two people who had begun as adversaries had found unexpected common ground in their shared belief in authenticity and integrity. Tomorrow, visitors would stream through the Westbrook's doors to confront difficult questions about art and ethics. Critics would debate their approach. Some would applaud their courage. Others would question their decisions. Through it all, the museum would stand as testament to the power of difficult conversations, to the beauty that emerges when truth is valued above comfort. And in a quiet corner office, Eleanor Reed would begin to imagine a future she had never dared to envision, one where her voice was not just heard, but amplified, where her passion found expression not just in carefully arranged exhibits, but in the very mission of the institution she loved. A future where authenticity was recognized not as a liability, but as the most valuable asset of all. As they reached the museum steps, Maxwell paused, turning to her with quiet certainty. Whatever you decide about the directorship, about any of this, know that you've changed the Westbrook irrevocably. You've changed me. Eleanor smiled, feeling the truth of his words settling into place like the final piece of a complex exhibition. Authenticity tends to do that, she replied simply. It reveals what was always meant to be seen. Together, they climbed the steps toward the museum, toward the masterpiece they were still in the process of creating.